The number 14 bus took me to the familiar stop in 20 minutes. I got off, adjusted my purse on my shoulder, and headed down the quiet street toward Christopher's house. The fall wind ruffled the yellow leaves on the trees, and I shivered as I pulled my coat tighter around me. At 72, I still felt alert enough to drive across Haysham to my son's house when he asked me to babysit. It wasn't him, of course. It was always Valerie who called, and always just as I was about to do my own thing. It was about a 5-minute walk from the bus stop to their house. I knew every turn, every crack in the asphalt, every house on that street. In the 2 years they'd lived here, I'd traveled this way countless times. Valerie loved to go somewhere unexpectedly, to the doctor, to the store, to a friend's house, and each time she needed a babysitter immediately. A free babysitter, of course. I've never asked for money to look after my grandchildren, and it never occurred to me. It's my family. Christopher's house looked like any other in this middle-class neighborhood, a neat lawn, a white picket fence, a 2-story structure with red shingles. Nothing fancy, but decent. I knew they had taken out a 30-year mortgage, and Valerie was always complaining about the payments. Although, to be honest, Valerie liked to complain in general. About the payments, about Christopher's job, about the kids eating too much, about daycare getting more expensive, about me not helping them often enough. She never said the last one directly, but I understood the implication. No sooner had I reached the porch than the door opened and 6-year-old Tyler, my youngest grandson, came running out. 8-year-old Hazel peeked out behind him, but she immediately hid back inside the house. Tyler was the opposite of his sister. Open, affectionate, always happy to see me. Hazel, on the other hand, was becoming more and more like her mother with each passing month. Withdrawn, distrustful, with that special look on her face that said, "I know better." "Grandma Evie," Tyler shouted, throwing himself into my arms with such force that I could barely stand on my feet. "Careful, baby," I laughed, hugging him back. "You know Grandma's not so tough anymore." "Mom said you're going to sit with us while they go to the store," Tyler informed me, grabbing my hand and dragging me into the house. "She also said that if we misbehaved, you would tell us." I shook my head. Valerie always had a way of turning my presence into a threat to the kids, instead of presenting it as a pleasant time with Grandma. I was used to it, though. Over the past 2 years, I'd learned not to take much of what my sister-in-law said or did to heart. Otherwise, I'd have lost my mind. The hallway greeted me with the familiar smell of expensive air freshener. Valerie had bought it at a specialty store and was always bragging about how they used it in 5-star hotels. On the walls were pictures of the family in beautiful frames, the professional photos they took every year that cost them a fortune. I remembered Valerie complaining about the price, but continuing to book these photo shoots because that's the way it's done in decent families. In the living room, Hazel was sprawled out on the couch, tucked into a clipboard. She didn't even look up when I walked in. Her blonde hair was neatly braided. Valerie loved dressing her daughter up like a living doll. Hazel was wearing a new dress that had obviously cost more than my cape. "Hi, Hazel," I said. "Hi," she mumbled, not looking away from the screen. The living room looked like a picture from a magazine, immaculately clean, tastefully furnished. Not a single thing missing. Valerie had spent months choosing this furniture, constantly showing Christopher pictures on the internet and asking my opinion, which she'd never considered. In the end, they chose an expensive ivory leather sofa and a glass coffee table that I thought was completely impractical for a family with small children. "Hazel, say hello to Grandma properly." Valerie's voice came from the stairs. My sister-in-law was coming down, adjusting her earrings while checking something on her phone. Valerie was 34, a manager at some cosmetics company, and she always looked like she'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. Even when she went to the store, she dressed like she was going to a business meeting. Today, she wore black pants, a white blouse, and a jacket that probably cost as much as my monthly pension. "Hi, Evelyn," she said, giving me a peck on the cheek. "Thanks for agreeing to sit. We need to go to the mall to pick out Christopher a new suit for work. You know how important it is to make the right impression on your bosses." I nodded. Christopher had been working at the ad agency for 5 years now, but he was still just an ordinary middle manager. Valerie thought his appearance was the problem, and she was constantly buying him new clothes, spending money they didn't have much of anyway. She was convinced that an expensive suit would automatically get her husband a promotion, and I didn't dare dissuade her from this naive belief. "Of course, dear. How long do you plan to be away?" 3 or 4 hours. Maybe we'll stop somewhere else." Valerie's back on the phone. The kids had lunch, so no need to feed them. Hazel's doing her homework. Make sure she doesn't slack off. Tyler can play, but no more than an hour on the console or he'll be cranky tonight. Oh yeah, if someone calls the house, don't go near the phone. Let the answering machine record it. Also, make sure the kids don't eat sweets before dinner. She spoke quickly, without raising her eyes from the screen, as if she were reading out instructions. I listened, realizing that to Valerie, I was just a free babysitter who was always there to help. There was never a question of, "Can you?" or "Will you be okay?" Just, "Come at such and such a time," and a list of rules to follow. "Where's Christopher?" I asked. "Warming up the car." Valerie finally looked up and looked at me. "By the way, Evelyn, I wanted to talk to you. Chris and I have been thinking. You know how hard it's been for us. The kids are growing up. Expenses are rising. It would be great if you could help us out more often. Not just babysitting, but, a family needs to stick together through the tough times." I understood perfectly. Valerie hinted at the money without saying so. She always did it through innuendo and innuendo, getting the other person to suggest what she wanted. It was her favorite technique, and she used it not only with me, but also with Christopher, and even with the children. Never direct demands, only gentle pressure and guilt-tripping. "I need to think about it," I replied neutrally. Of course, of course. Just keep in mind that family is the most important thing, and grandchildren love you very much. They need a grandmother who cares about them." Valerie smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. "Okay, here we go. Kids, behave yourselves with Grandma." She grabbed her purse, an expensive leather bag she'd gotten as a birthday present from Christopher, and ran out the door. A minute later, I heard the car start, and they drove away. Christopher didn't even stop by to say goodbye. He'd been strangely avoiding talking to me lately, as if he felt uncomfortable in my presence. The silence in the house seemed deafening after Valerie's rapid-fire chatter. Hazel was still sitting with her tablet. Tyler settled on the floor with the cars. I looked around. The living room looked immaculate, no extra stuff. Everything in its place. Valerie was a stickler for order, but this order was dead, inanimate. There was no coziness in the house, only expensive beauty, which did not invite to stay, but rather warned, "Do not touch anything." "Hazel, what are you doing?" I asked, approaching my granddaughter. "I'm playing a game," she mumbled without looking up. "And what about homework?" "I'll do it later. Mommy said I should do it now." Hazel rolled her eyes with the expression I usually saw on Valerie's face. "Mommy says a lot of things. I'm not a little girl. I know when to do my homework. I have a schedule. 8 years old and already so cocky." I sighed, realizing it was useless to argue. Valerie raised her children the same way she treated everyone else, through coercion and manipulation. No wonder Hazel grew up the same way. The girl learned to defend herself the only way she could, by becoming as cold and calculating as her mother. "Grandma, will you play with me?" Tyler ran up to me, holding a red car. Let's build a garage. I also have a new backhoe. Mom bought it yesterday. Do you want to see it? Sure, baby. I sank down on the carpet next to him, trying not to think about how my knees would hurt when I got up. Tyler was a different kid, open, affectionate, not yet tainted by the cynicism that had already settled in Hazel. I loved spending time with him when no one was controlling us. He told me about everything, about his friends in kindergarten, about the teacher who reads funny books, about the fact that for lunch they gave potatoes with cutlets, and it was very tasty. We built a garage out of cardboard boxes I found in the pantry. Valerie kept them just in case, as usual, even though she never used them. Tyler excitedly rolled the cars around the makeshift roads, and I told him stories about each one. The red car was a fire truck rushing to a call. The blue truck was hauling sand for a construction site, and the yellow backhoe was helping build a new house for a toy family. Grandma, why is Mommy always mean? Tyler asked, not looking up from the trucks. The question caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say to a 6-year-old who had already noticed that all was not well in their home. Mommy's not mean, kiddo. She's just tired from work. Is Daddy tired too? Yeah, Daddy's tired too. Then why don't they sleep more? When I'm tired, Mommy tells me to go to bed. Children's logic has always struck me as simple yet profound. Tyler saw contradiction where adults are used to finding excuses. Adults get tired differently than children, and they rest differently. I see. Tyler nodded gravely and went back to playing with the cars. Time flew by. Hazel sat there with her tablet, occasionally glancing at us with a look of superiority on her face. I tried to engage her in the game, but she answered one-word answers and stared at the screen again. At one point, she did put the tablet down and started on her homework, spreading her textbooks out on the coffee table. But when I offered to help, she dismissed it. I can do this on my own, she said in a tone that brooked no objection. Around 4 o'clock, Tyler was tired and wanted a snack. I took him into the kitchen, where I found exactly what I expected, a sink full of dirty dishes. Valerie, of course, hadn't bothered to wash the plates after dinner. Plates, cups, a soup pot, a cutting board, all of it cluttered in the sink, waiting for someone else to do the cleanup. I opened the refrigerator looking for something suitable for the kids. The fridge was stocked with groceries. Valerie shopped at expensive stores and bought the best. Organic yogurt, farm eggs, premium meats. On one shelf were jars of baby food, apparently for special occasions when she didn't have time to cook. Grandma, can we have cookies? Tyler asked, pointing to a jar on the top shelf of the cabinet. Something healthy first, I replied, pulling out apples. Here, have an apple and then you can have a cookie. Tyler agreed without objection. I sliced the apple, thinking about how strange it felt to be a guest in my own son's house. Sure, I was happy to help with the grandkids, but I was frustrated with Valerie's attitude. She took my help for granted, never really thanked me, only made hints that I could do more. While Tyler ate his apple, I couldn't help myself and started doing the dishes. I couldn't leave the whole pile of dirty plates behind. Besides, I knew Valerie would complain to Christopher later about how hard it was for her to run the household and indirectly hint that I could help out more around the house. When Tyler finished his apple, I gave him the promised cookies and suggested we watch cartoons. We settled on the couch and I cuddled my grandson, and he snuggled up to me, warm and trusting. At such moments, I forgot about all the troubles and just enjoyed my grandson's company. He was telling me about a cartoon, something about talking cars learning to be friends. Grandma, are you friends with Mom? Tyler suddenly asked. Of course I am. Mom is Dad's wife and Dad is my son. We're all family. But you don't laugh together. Friends are supposed to laugh together, right? There's that childish way of looking at things again, simple and ruthless. Tyler was right. We really never laughed with Valerie. Our interactions were limited to polite phrases, childcare instructions, and covert requests for help. Adults have different friendships. I repeated my usual formulation. Adults are weird, Tyler concluded seriously. The house was slowly sinking into evening silence. It was starting to get dark outside the window, and I glanced at my watch, waiting for Christopher and Valerie to return. They'd promised to be back by 6 o'clock, but it was already past 7:30. It was normal for them to be late and not give me a heads up, though. The sound of slamming car doors broke the evening silence at exactly 7:20. I glanced at my watch and mentally sighed. Being almost an hour and a half late was a regular occurrence for Christopher and Valerie. Tyler jumped up on the couch and rushed to the window, pressing his nose against the glass. "Mom and Dad are here," he announced excitedly. Hazel looked up from her textbooks, which remained untouched on the coffee table. She hadn't written a line during my presence, only occasionally turning the pages to make it look like she was studying. Now she stacked the books quickly, as if trying to give the impression that she was studying diligently. The front door opened with a distinctive creak that Christopher kept meaning to fix, but never got around to it. Valerie was the first to enter, laden with packages from expensive stores. She was followed by my son, also carrying shopping bags. By the number of bags, I could guess that they had bought not only a suit for Christopher, but a lot more. "Hello, children," Valerie exclaimed, placing the bags by the door. "How are you doing? Did you behave yourself with Grandma?" "Yeah," Tyler answered, still bouncing with excitement. "We've been building the garage and watching cartoons." "Great," Valerie said absent-mindedly, already rummaging through her purse for her phone. Christopher set his bags next to his wife's and finally looked in my direction. "Hi, Mom. How are the kids?" "They're fine," I replied, rising from the couch. Tyler was good. Hazel was doing her homework. "Homework?" Valerie pulled away from the phone and looked at her daughter carefully. "Hazel, show me what you did." Hazel hesitated, opening her notebook. "Yeah, I haven't finished it yet. The assignment is complicated." "You haven't finished what?" Valerie's voice became sharper. "You've been sitting with your books for 2 hours." The girl frowned guiltily, and I felt a familiar sense of embarrassment rising in me. Valerie was the kind of person who always found someone to blame in every situation. And now her gaze slowly shifted from her daughter to me. "Evelyn, you were watching the kids. Why didn't you make sure Hazel did her homework?" "I offered to help, but Hazel said she could do it on her own," I said cautiously. "Do it on her own?" Valerie shook her hands. "She's 8 years old. Of course she can't handle herself. Children need to be supervised, their every move. I told you to watch the lessons." Valerie's tone grew more and more irritated, and I could see Tyler hiding behind the back of the couch and Hazel shrinking into a ball. The kids knew that one of Mommy's lectures was about to start, and they were trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. "Valerie, you don't have to do that," Christopher interjected quietly, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Don't do what?" His wife turned to him. "I'm asking you to do your homework. It's not rocket science." And as a result, Hazel wasted her time, and now she has to sit over the lessons until night. I felt my cheeks begin to burn with shame and indignation. Valerie was talking to me like a neglectful servant, not like a grandmother to her children. But what made me even angrier was Christopher just stood by me and remained silent. My son, who I had raised, who I had educated, who I loved more than anything in the world, hadn't said a word in my defense. "I thought an 8-year-old could control his own time," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "That's exactly the problem," Valerie cut in. "You were thinking, not acting. Today's kids require constant supervision. They have so many distractions: tablets, toys, TV. If you don't keep an eye on them every minute, they'll neglect everything." She made it sound like I was an inexperienced nanny, not a woman who had raised her own son, as if my experience as a mother meant nothing to her modern pedagogical knowledge. Mom, maybe we shouldn't talk about this now. Christopher tried to intervene again, but Valerie was already on a roll. No, Chris, we have to talk about it. If your mother is going to continue to help with the kids, she needs to understand our rules. We have a system, we have a schedule, we have clear expectations. You can't just come in here and do things your way. Your own way? I couldn't take it anymore. I played with Tyler, made sure the kids didn't starve, washed the pile of dishes you left in the sink. What exactly did I do wrong? Wash the dishes? Valerie frowned. Who asked you to? I told you, the kids have had lunch. There's no need to feed them. Tyler wanted an apple, and I was doing the dishes because… I hesitated, realizing that any explanation would sound like a rebuke. Because you think I'm a bad hostess? Valerie crossed her arms over her chest. Evelyn, I work full-time, raise 2 kids, run a household. I'm sorry I don't always have time to keep things perfectly clean. I remained silent, realizing that any word I said would be turned against me. Valerie had an amazing talent for turning any situation around, so that she was the victim and everyone else was to blame for her problems. And anyway, she continued, I don't like that you let Tyler eat between meals. We have a clear eating schedule. The kids have to eat at a certain time, or they won't have a proper dinner. One apple won't hurt a child. I couldn't stand it. You can see that, can't you? Valerie turned to Christopher. She doesn't listen to our rules. We tell her how to treat the children, and she does it her way. How can we trust her with the children if she ignores our demands? Christopher shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, avoiding looking me in the eye. I could see he was uncomfortable, but he wasn't going to take my side. Over the years of marriage, Valerie had accustomed him to the idea that the wife was always right and everyone else had to adjust to her rules. Valerie, why don't we have dinner first? He suggested in a weak voice. No, Christopher, this matter needs to be resolved right now. Valerie looked at me again. Evelyn, I appreciate your help, I really do. But if you want to continue babysitting your grandchildren, you have to follow our rules. No snacking between meals, strictly supervised homework, no TV beyond the allowed time, and no do-it-yourself chores. She listed the rules like a boss giving instructions to a subordinate. And the bitterest part was that Christopher stood by her side and nodded, agreeing with her every word. You see, Mom, he finally spoke, we do have our own system of upbringing. We studied a lot of literature, consulted with a child psychologist. Modern methods are different from those of our time. In our time, as if I was an ancient old woman who understands nothing about children, as if my experience raising him myself was something outdated and harmful. Okay, I said, feeling my insides clench with resentment. I'll follow your rules. That's great. Valerie brightened, changing her tone from judgmental to sweet and sweet in an instant. I told you we'd find common ground. A family has to work together. She approached the children, who had been sitting silently on the sofa all this time. Hazel, go do your homework, and I want it done in an hour. And you, Tyler, wash your hands and get ready for dinner. The children silently went about their business, and the living room became tensely quiet. Valerie began to sort through her shopping, pulling clothes and accessories out of bags. Christopher helped her, avoiding looking in my direction. Look at the suit we picked out for Chris. Valerie showed a dark blue jacket. Classic cut, expensive fabric. It cost a lot, of course, but you can't skimp on image. Right, Chris? Yes, it's a nice suit. Christopher agreed. I also bought myself a new dress. We're having a corporate party next month, so we need to look the part. Valerie pulled out a black dress with shiny details. What do you think, Evelyn? Do you like it? I nodded, not trusting my voice. After the scene that had just happened, Valerie acted as if nothing had happened. It was her usual tactic first to make a scene, put everyone in their place, and then switch to casual chit-chat, as if the conflict was just a misunderstanding. By the way, she said, putting the shopping away, Chris and I were thinking, maybe you could come over more often, not just when we ask you to babysit, but just for fun, to help out around the house, to spend time with the grandkids. They love you so much. That's the real purpose of this whole conversation. First, to put me in my place, to show me who's in charge, and then to ask for more help. Valerie's pattern was criticism first, then reconciliation, then a request. We know you have a lot of free time, Christopher continued, and the kids really miss their grandmother. Maybe you could come over a couple times a week. Help Valerie with the cleaning, babysit while she's at the store, or while I'm working late, Valerie added. I'm going through a very busy time right now. New projects, deadlines. It would be nice to know the kids are taken care of and the house is in order. They sounded like they were offering me a privilege, not an extra burden, as if I should be thanking them for the opportunity to nanny and housekeep for free. I'll think about it, I said again. Of course you will, Valerie nodded. Just not for too long. The holidays are coming up, and the kids will need special care. And in January, Hazel starts taking extra math classes, so we'll definitely need help. She had already planned my life without even asking my opinion. In her mind, I was a resource to be used as she saw fit, a free labor force that was always ready to help and never minded. Mom, why don't you stay for dinner? Christopher suggested it. No thanks. I should get home. Of course, you have your own things to do, Valerie said with a touch of irony in her voice. We understand. I gathered my purse and headed out. Tyler caught up with me in the hallway. Grandma, are you coming over again? He asked, hugging my legs. Of course I will, I said, stroking his head. When? Soon, baby, soon. Christopher walked me to the door, but we didn't say anything to each other. He helped me into my coat and opened the door. Thanks for babysitting, he said, looking over my head. You're welcome, I said. The door closed behind me, and I was alone on the porch. The evening air felt especially fresh after the stuffy atmosphere of my son's house. I walked slowly to the bus stop, thinking about what had just happened. The next 2 weeks went by at a regular pace. Valerie called 3 times one time to pick Hazel up from school because she was late for work. Another time to babysit Tyler while she and Christopher went to the doctor. And a third time just to ask me to come help clean up before the guests arrived. Each time, I'd dutifully driven across town, done what was asked of me, and returned home feeling like I'd been used. But on Saturday morning, Valerie called again, and there was a special tiredness in her voice. Evelyn, can you come over? I need your help urgently. What's wrong? I asked, already imagining another emergency. Nothing much, it's just, I'm going crazy. I can't cope at all. The kids aren't listening. The house is a mess. Chris is working late, and I have an important presentation tomorrow that I haven't prepared for. There was real desperation in her voice, and I felt a familiar prick of guilt. Maybe I was being too hard on my sister-in-law. Maybe she's really struggling and needs my support. Of course I'll be there. I'll be at your place in an hour. Thank you, Evelyn. You're a real lifesaver. When I arrived, I found Valerie in her robe, her hair disheveled and her eyes red from lack of sleep. The house looked as if a hurricane had blown through it. Toys were everywhere. Unwashed plates were piled on the kitchen table, and someone had spilled cookies on the carpet in the living room. God, I'm so glad you're here, Valerie breathed out, wrapping her arms around me. I didn't know what to do anymore. The kids were sitting in front of the TV, staring at the screen like they were in a trance. Something was flashing and beeping on the screen, and Tyler and Hazel were staring at it wide-eyed. What's going on? I asked. Everything is happening. Valerie shook her hands. First, I had a headache half the night, couldn't sleep. Then Tyler woke up at 5 in the morning and demanded breakfast. Hazel was cranky, wouldn't get dressed. And I have to prepare a presentation for Monday, or I could lose a client. She spoke quickly, as if to vent the fatigue and irritation she'd accumulated overnight. Christopher couldn't help? I asked cautiously. Christopher? Valerie laughed bitterly. Chris is working on 2 projects at the same time. He leaves at 8 in the morning and arrives at 10 at night. He's hardly ever home. All week I'm alone with the kids, alone with all the problems. I looked around, assessing the extent of the mess. Nothing critical, just the usual Saturday morning chaos of a family with 2 kids. In half an hour, I could have everything in order. All right, let's take it one step at a time, I said. You take care of your presentation, and I'll clean up the house and watch the kids. You're so good. Valerie put her hand to her heart. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without you. Come here, Tyler. Say hello to Grandma. Tyler reluctantly pulled himself away from the screen and ran over to me. Hazel didn't even turn her head. Hazel, her mother sharply called out to her. Say hello to Grandma and turn off the TV. Stop staring at the screen. But we just started watching. The girl was indignant. I don't want to hear anything. You've been sitting in front of the TV for 2 hours. Go play in your rooms. The children reluctantly went upstairs, and Valerie plopped down on the sofa and rubbed her temples. See how naughty they've gotten? It used to be that my word was law, but now they argue at every remark. Especially Hazel. She's turning into a real teenager, even though she's only 8. I began to collect toys, putting them in special baskets, which Valerie had placed throughout the house. Her storage system was elaborate, but for some reason the toys were always out of place. Evelyn, Valerie called to me as I went into the kitchen to do the dishes. I need to have a serious talk with you. I stopped, sensing something wrong. Valerie usually said serious talk before she asked for something big. You see, it's getting harder and harder for me to handle the kids and the house. Chris is working more and more, and I can't slow down either. The competition in our field is fierce, and the kids need constant attention. She spoke slowly, choosing her words, and I realized that this was not a spontaneous complaint, but a prepared speech. Chris and I were thinking, maybe you could help us out on a regular basis. Not sporadically, like now, but on a regular basis, like, say, 3 times a week. 3 times a week? That's what I said. Yeah, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, whatever you prefer. You could pick up the kids from school and daycare when I'm working late, help with homework, watch them in the evening while Chris and I are at work. Valerie sounded like she was offering me a good deal, not asking me to work as a free half-day nanny. You see, Evelyn, it's very hard for modern parents. We have different pressures than your generation did. Back then, the wife could stay home with the kids, and the husband could provide for the family. Now both of us have to work. Otherwise, we can't survive. She got up from the couch and came to me, taking my hands. I need your support so much. You know what it's like to be a mom, to take care of a family. You have experience, wisdom, and I don't have the strength anymore. Her voice sounded sincere, and for a moment it seemed to me that Valerie really needed help, not just trying to shift her responsibilities onto me. I realize it's a big ask, she continued, but you see the state I'm in, and the children need a grandmother. They lack family warmth, stability. At that moment, there was shouting from upstairs, children arguing about something. Valerie rolled her eyes. You see, they can't even play normally. They fight all the time. They get cranky. I think they need someone more patient than me. Kids are kids, I said. They're always making noise and arguing. Yes, but they behave better with you. You know how to handle them. And Valerie lowered her head. Honestly, sometimes I feel like a bad mom. I yell at them. I get irritated over nothing, and then I feel guilty. That confession sounded so sincere, I felt sorry for her. Maybe behind all these demands and claims hid an ordinary, tired woman who cannot cope with the burden of responsibility. Valerie, maybe you should rethink your regimen. Find ways to make life easier. I've tried everything. Valerie shook her head. I hired a housekeeper. Too expensive. I went to a nanny. The kids didn't accept her. I tried to talk to other moms about helping each other. They all had their own problems. She took my hands in hers again, and I could see the pleading in her eyes. Evelyn, you're the only one who can help us. The kids love you. They trust you. And it won't be hard for you. You're retired. You have time. That last part stung. There's time, as if my life was empty, devoid of meaning and interest. It was like I was sitting at home, waiting to be put to good use. I need to think about it, I said. Sure, sure, Valerie agreed quickly. Just please don't take too long. Winter vacation is coming up, and the kids will need constant supervision, and the new year is a particularly busy time for me. At that moment, Christopher appeared at home. He came in holding bags from the grocery store. Hi, he said tiredly. Mom, are you here? Great. Chris works even on Saturdays, Valerie explained. He just got back from a meeting with a client. Christopher put the bags in the kitchen and came over to us. What are you talking about? I was telling Evelyn about our idea, about having her help us on a regular basis. Christopher nodded. Yes, Mom, that would be great. We really need your help. You see? Valerie picked up on that. We're not asking you to give up your life. Just a few hours a week. And think how good it would be for the kids. More time with a loving grandmother. They stood in front of me, my son and his wife, and looked on with hope. And in that hope, I sensed not just a request for help, but something more, an expectation, confidence that I couldn't refuse them. Tyler and Hazel are growing up so fast, Christopher added. Soon they'll be teenagers, and there won't be much time to spend with Grandma. And now you can be an important part of their lives. And our lives, too, Valerie said. We're a family. Families are supposed to support each other in times of need. The children's cries came from upstairs again. See? Valerie pointed at the ceiling. I have to keep them apart all the time, keep an eye on them, control them, and with you, they'll be calmer. And you can pass on what you know, Christopher added. Family traditions, stories, wisdom, it's priceless. They were saying the right words, appealing to the right feelings, and I felt my resolve to resist begin to melt. After all, what's wrong with helping a family? What's wrong with spending time with grandchildren? Okay, I said finally. Let's give it a shot. We will? Valerie glowed. Evelyn, you have no idea how helpful you are. She hugged me tightly, and I could smell her expensive perfume. Thank you, Mom, Christopher said, hugging me too. You're the best grandma ever. And then, standing in their arms, I felt something strange. Not the joy of spending more time with my grandchildren. Not the satisfaction of helping my family. It was an emptiness, as if I had just agreed to something that would not change my life for the better. It had been 3 weeks since I'd agreed to help Christopher and Valerie on a full-time basis. In that time, I'd learned what it meant to say, "Give me a finger and they'll bite your whole arm off." What initially sounded like a few hours a week quickly turned into daily calls for help. Valerie found 1,000 reasons why she needed my presence, then an urgent meeting at work, then a sudden headache or just fatigue she couldn't handle. This morning she called especially early. Evelyn, we're having guests over for the evening. Chris has invited his new coworker and his wife, very important people on whom his career depends. I have to cook dinner, get the house in order, and the kids will just get in the way. Can you come over at 5 p.m. and babysit? I looked at my watch. It was only 8 in the morning and Valerie was already planning my day. Sure, I replied, as always. And one more request, Valerie continued. Could you stay for dinner? It would be great for the guests to see our friendly family. You know how important it is to make the right impression. I wanted to object that I hadn't prepared for meeting strangers, that I didn't have the right clothes for such occasions, but Valerie was already going on. I'll cook your favorite dish, chicken with herbs, and we have a great wine, red and white. It'll be very nice. Good, I agreed, suppressing a sigh. The day dragged on slowly. I cleaned my apartment, did laundry, and made myself dinner, but my thoughts kept returning to the evening ahead. These family dinners had become a source of anxiety for me in recent weeks. They made me feel less like a member of the family and more like a decoration designed to create the right impression. By 5:30, I started to get ready. I put on my best dark blue suit, which I had saved for special occasions, carefully styled my hair, and even put on a little makeup. In the mirror, I looked like a respectable 72-year-old woman who could have graced any family dinner. When I left the house, I found that I was late. The bus had been delayed, and now I had to hurry to be on time. Valerie didn't like it when plans were interrupted, and I imagined her displeased face if I showed up late. I walked briskly toward the bus stop. It was a cold evening, the wind chilling through me despite my warm coat. The leaves swirled underfoot, creating a sort of unsettling atmosphere. Haysham always seemed particularly bleak to me at this time of year. Gray skies, bare trees, houses that seemed to shrink from the cold. There was a bus at the bus stop, and I hurried to it, afraid I would be late. The driver was already closing the doors, but when he saw me, he waited. I nodded gratefully and got on, breathing hard from my fast walk. All the way to Christopher's house, I thought about the evening ahead. I wondered what kind of people these co-workers were. Valerie had probably already prepared a whole program for them, showing them the house, telling them about the family's achievements, showing them the perfect life, and I was to play the role of a loving grandmother in this performance. Getting off at the right stop, I hurried again. It was already 6:10, and I could imagine how nervous Valerie was. She hated it when things didn't go according to plan, especially in front of important guests. I walked down the familiar street trying to ignore the fatigue in my legs. At 72, such haste was getting harder and harder for me, but Valerie didn't understand that. For her, I was just a resource that should be available at short notice. As I neared my son's house, I noticed the figure of an older woman ahead of me. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane, and reminded me of my late mother. Dark coat, headscarf, bent back, a typical picture of old age in our city. I wanted to go around her so as not to waste time, but at that moment the woman suddenly stopped right in front of me. Trying not to collide with her, I swerved to the side, but I miscalculated and hit her shoulder. I'm sorry, I said quickly, trying to keep moving. But the woman grabbed my arm with unexpected strength. I turned around and saw her face, swarthy, wrinkled, with shrewd dark eyes. She was a gypsy, one of those gypsies who sometimes appeared on the streets of Hysham, telling fortunes for coins or selling amulets. Forgive me, my dear, she said with a strong accent. I didn't mean to interrupt. That's all right, I said, trying to free my hand. I have to hurry, but the gypsy woman wouldn't let me go. Her eyes were looking straight into mine, and there was a strange anxiety in them. Wait, she whispered. I have something to tell you. I'm really in a hurry, I repeated, feeling irritation building. It's important, the woman insisted. It's very important to you. She stepped closer to me, and I could smell smoke and herbs on her clothes. Her face was serious, almost frightened. Tonight, at dinner, she whispered, looking me straight in the eye. Drink only red wine and nothing else. Do you hear me? Just red wine. What? I didn't understand. Your son. The gypsy woman hesitated, as if she was searching for words. Your son is not what he seems, and neither is his wife. They. She didn't finish, but her gaze became even more intense. Only red wine, she repeated. Promise me, it's very important. I stood there, not knowing what to think. The woman was clearly out of her mind, talking nonsense. But there was such conviction in her voice, such anxiety, that I felt uneasy. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. You will, the gypsy nodded. But it will be too late if you don't listen. Only red wine, do you hear? And watch carefully. Watch how they behave. She let go of my hand and took a step back. Go, she said. But remember my words. I stood for a moment, staring at the strange woman, and then hurried on. My heart was pounding, not only from walking so fast, but also from the strange excitement her words evoked. What was this nonsense about red wine? And what did she mean about Christopher and Valerie? Clearly the woman was not in her right mind. Perhaps she was suffering from some kind of mental disorder or was just trying to bilk me out of money for a prediction. But then, why did her words disturb me so much? Why couldn't I put them out of my mind? As I approached my son's house, I looked back. The gypsy was standing where I had left her, staring after me. Even from a distance, I could feel her gaze on me. Nonsense, I said to myself. A common beggar who tries to impress people with mystical predictions. But my hands were shaking as I pressed the doorbell. Christopher opened the door, already dressed in the new suit he and Valerie had bought last week. Mom, finally, he said. We were getting worried. The guests will be here in half an hour. I'm sorry, the bus was late, I said as I entered the house. It's okay. The main thing is that you're here. Valerie came out of the kitchen, also dressed up and excited. The kids have already eaten. They just need to go to bed at 9. We'll have dinner in the dining room. The house was immaculately cleaned, candles burning everywhere, creating a cozy atmosphere. The kitchen smelled like something delicious, and I thought Valerie had really made an effort to impress her guests. Evelyn, you look wonderful, Valerie said, eyeing my outfit. Just what I needed for a family dinner. I nodded, still thinking about the strange encounter on the street. The gypsy woman's words echoed in my head. Just red wine and nothing else. What will we drink at dinner? I asked, trying to keep my voice natural. We have an excellent choice, Christopher answered. A red burgundy and a white chardonnay. You like white, don't you? Yes, I've always preferred white wine. Red seemed too tart, too heavy. But now the words of a strange woman echoed in my head. I think I'll try red tonight, I said. Valerie raised her eyebrows in surprise. Red? You don't like red. We have a lovely white wine, bought especially for you. I wanted to try something new, I said, surprised by my own words. Christopher and Valerie looked at each other, and there was something in their eyes that struck me as odd. Was it surprise or something else? Of course, Mom, Christopher said. Red is red. And then the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of guests. The guests were Brandon Cole, the new art director of the advertising agency where Christopher worked, and his wife, Celeste. Brandon was a man in his early 40s, with a neat beard and an expensive watch that he kept glancing at. Celeste looked like a model from a magazine, a tall, slender blonde in an elegant black dress, with flawless makeup and manicure. Valerie greeted them with a radiant smile I'd only seen on particularly festive occasions. Christopher shook Brandon's hand with such enthusiasm, as if he were meeting a long-awaited friend, not a coworker he barely knew. This is my mom, Evelyn, Christopher introduced me. Mom, this is Brandon Cole, the guy I told you about. I shook Brandon's hand, trying to smile naturally. though my thoughts were still preoccupied with the strange encounter on the street. Celeste barely nodded at me, giving me a quick, appraising look that said, "I see, just your average grandmother." "What a cozy house," Celeste said, looking around. "Very homey." I could detect a subtle condescension in her tone, which Valerie must have noticed too, because her smile tightened. "Thank you. We're trying to create a comfortable atmosphere for the family," she replied. "Kids, say hello to your guests." Tyler and Hazel obediently said hello and were immediately sent upstairs to finish their homework. I could see how Valerie wanted to show her guests what well-behaved children they were, but at the same time keep them out of the way so they wouldn't interfere with adult conversation. We made our way to the living room, where Christopher offered an aperitif. On the coffee table were bottles and elegant glasses that Valerie only brought out for special occasions. "What will you have?" Christopher asked. "We have excellent whiskey, gin, vermouth." "Whiskey, if I may," Brandon replied. "Single malt." "I'll have a gin and tonic," Celeste added. Christopher started pouring drinks, clearly nervous. I could see him trying to make an impression, choosing the right words, watching his every move. Valerie was tense too, though she tried to appear natural. "What'll it be, Evelyn?" Celeste turned to me with a polite smile. "Nothing yet, thank you. I'll wait until dinner." We talked about work, new projects at the agency, and trends in the advertising industry. I listened, half listening, watching my family. Christopher talked too fast, laughing too loudly at Brandon's not particularly funny jokes. Valerie was constantly adjusting non-existent creases in her dress and glancing at her watch, apparently worried about how dinner was going. Half an hour later, we moved into the dining room. Valerie had done her best. The table was set impeccably, with snow-white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and silverware that she had inherited from her grandmother. The candles created a warm glow, and the flower arrangement in the center of the table looked like a work of art. "How beautiful!" Celeste exclaimed, and this time there was sincerity in her voice. "You have excellent taste, Valerie." Valerie glowed with pleasure. Compliments about style were the most precious to her. "Thank you. I always thought the atmosphere was as important as the food." Christopher began to open the wine. There were 2 bottles on the table, a red Burgundy and a white Chardonnay, just as he'd said. I watched as he deftly handled the corkscrew, and again I remembered the gypsy woman's words. Only red wine and nothing else. "Which do you prefer, red or white?" Christopher asked the guests. "Red, please," Brandon answered. "Red for me, too," Celeste added. "Great. Mom, do you want your usual white?" Christopher turned to me with a bottle of white wine in his hands. "No," I said. "Red." "Red?" he asked, frozen for a moment. "You always drink white." "And today, we have a particularly good Chardonnay from your favorite region." "I want to try something new." I repeated the words I'd said in the kitchen. "But Mom," Valerie intervened, "remember the last time you tasted red and said it was too tart? I specifically chose a lighter white wine for you." They both looked at me with a strange expression, not just surprise, but something more complex. Anxiety? Irritation? "I'll try the red," I repeated stubbornly. Christopher paused for a moment, then picked up the bottle of red wine. But he poured it for me last, serving the guests first, then Valerie, then himself, and the portion he poured me was noticeably smaller than the others. "Try it first," he said. "If you don't like it, I'll open the white." I took a sip of the red wine. It was indeed tart, with a rich flavor that took some getting used to, but it was drinkable. "It's good," I said. "I like it." Valerie brought the first course, an exquisite pumpkin puree soup with croutons and pumpkin seeds. It was restaurant quality, and the guests began to praise the hostess's culinary skills. The conversation at the table revolved around work, vacation plans, and restaurants worth visiting. I participated in the conversation minimally, mostly just nodding and smiling. My attention was elsewhere. I was watching Christopher and Valerie. Something about their behavior seemed odd to me. They glanced at my glass too often, too insistently offering to taste the white wine just for a sip. When I declined, quick glances slipped between them that they clearly didn't want me to notice. Evelyn, are you recently retired? Celeste asked, apparently trying to engage me in conversation. A few years now, I answered. I worked as an accountant for the municipal government. It must be nice to finally have a break from work. You have a lot of free time for hobbies, traveling. I wanted to answer that I don't have much free time, considering how often I have to help my son's family. But a glance at Valerie changed my mind. I didn't want to spoil the impression of a close-knit family in front of important guests. Yes, I try to keep up, I replied diplomatically. What do you think about modern technology? Celeste continued. It seems to me that the older generation does not always keep up with the progress. The question sounded patronizing, as if she were talking to a child. I saw Christopher wince, but he didn't say anything. I'm trying to keep up, I answered. I use the computer, and I know how to send email. Mom's very modern, Christopher interjected hastily. She's even on social media. It wasn't true. I hated social media, but I didn't bother correcting him. Valerie brought out the main course, the herb chicken, which she had prepared according to a special recipe. The meat really turned out tender and flavorful, and the side dish of roasted vegetables looked delicious. The guests again began to praise the culinary talents of the hostess. Valerie is a real chef, Brandon said. Christopher, you're lucky to have a wife. Yes, I know that. Christopher smiled. Don't you, Mom? You always said Valerie was a great cook. I nodded, though I remembered that Valerie had been a mediocre cook in the early years of their marriage. She'd learned to cook later, when she realized that her cooking skills were part of the ideal wife and mother image she'd worked hard to create. Mom, you've barely touched your wine, Christopher said. Why don't you try the white? Honestly, red doesn't go well with chicken. I'm fine, I said, taking another sip of red wine. But you're barely drinking it, Valerie insisted. I can see that you don't like it. Let me open a white because you love it. No, I said firmly. They looked at each other again, and at that moment I caught myself scrutinizing their faces. Christopher looked worried. Valerie looked annoyed. Why did they care so much about what exactly I was drinking? Why are they so insistent on suggesting white wine? Gypsy's words rang in my head again. Watch carefully. Watch how they behave. Maybe there was some truth to her delusion. Maybe I should really have watched the family more closely. Evelyn looks a little tired, Celeste said. Maybe you should have some water or juice. I feel fine, I replied, surprised at how many people were suddenly concerned about my well-being. Mom is always so resilient, Christopher said with a forced smile. But sometimes you have to listen to your body. The conversation drifted to other topics, but I could sense that the atmosphere had changed. Christopher and Valerie had become more tense. Their laughter sounded artificial, and their attempts to entertain their guests seemed desperate. Brandon talked about his plans to reorganize the department, hinting at possible personnel changes. Christopher listened as if his fate depended on every word. Valerie was eager to listen, asking intelligent questions and demonstrating her interest in his career. We need people who are willing to go beyond the standard solutions, Brandon said. Creativity, initiative, willingness to experiment. Chris is exactly that kind of person, Valerie intervened. He's always full of new ideas. Yes, I've noticed that, Brandon nodded. I was impressed with your latest project. Christopher brightened, and I could see the hope in his eyes. He was so desperate to succeed, so hungry for promotion and recognition. And Valerie shared that ambition, perhaps even more than he did. When dessert was served, Valerie's own exquisite tiramisu, the conversation became more personal. Celeste asked about the children, about plans for the future, about how she managed to combine work and family life. "You have such a close-knit family," she said. "You can see that you are all very close." "Yes, family is the most important thing for us," Valerie replied. "We always support each other." She looked at me with a smile that should have looked warm, but I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes. "Evelyn is a wonderful grandmother," Valerie continued. "The kids adore her. She helps us so much." "That's wonderful," Celeste nodded. "It's rare to find such a close-knit family these days." I sat and listened to them discuss me in the third person, as if I were something to brag about to the guests. But behind those words about a close-knit family, I sensed something else, something I hadn't noticed before or didn't want to notice. "Mom, you don't eat dessert at all," Christopher said. "Don't you like it?" "It's delicious," I said, taking a spoonful of tiramisu. "I'm just not very hungry." "Why don't you have some white wine?" Valerie suggested again. "It goes better with sweets." "Thanks, but no." She pursed her lips, and I saw her fingers tighten around the stem of the glass. Christopher didn't look pleased either, though he tried to hide it. The evening was gradually coming to an end. The guests praised the dinner, thanked each other for their hospitality, and began to pack up to go home. Brandon promised Christopher to talk to him about new projects on Monday, which clearly pleased my son. After the guest left, there was silence in the house. The kids were long since asleep, and the three of us remained in the dining room amidst the remnants of the holiday dinner. "It was a good night," Valerie said, starting to gather the dishes. Brandon was pleased. "Yes, I think we made a good impression," Christopher agreed. They both avoided looking at me, busy cleaning up, but there was a tension in the air that I couldn't explain. "I should get home," I said, rising from the table. "Sure, Mom. Thanks for coming." "It was important to us," Christopher replied, finally looking up at me. There was something strange in his gaze. Was it relief or disappointment? The ride home seemed interminably long. The bus traveled across town, stopping at every stop, and I sat at the window, staring out at the twinkling lights of Haysham and replaying the evening's events in my head. Christopher and Valerie's strange behavior kept me on my toes. Their insistence on the wine seemed more serious than concern. The gypsy woman's words echoed in my head like a haunting melody. "Only red wine and nothing else. Look carefully. Your son is not what he seems." Of course, these were the ramblings of a half-crazy old woman, but then why did I feel so anxious? Why couldn't I escape the feeling that something important was eluding my grasp? When I reached my apartment, I made myself some tea and sat down in a chair by the window. It was dark outside the window, broken only by the rare street lights and the glowing windows of the neighboring houses. The silence seemed especially profound after the noisy evening, and in that silence my thoughts gained the clarity they lacked in the hustle and bustle of the day. I tried to think of other family dinners, of which there had been many over the years. Valerie loved to organize such events, whether it was one of the children's birthdays, a wedding anniversary, or just a Sunday dinner, and always she insisted I be there. "The kids need to see Grandma. The family needs to come together. The celebration isn't complete without you." Now, in the quiet of my apartment, I began to analyze these gatherings from a new perspective. Strangely, the more I thought, the clearer details that had previously seemed insignificant became. For example, the way Valerie always knew in advance that I would be drinking. She never asked my preferences, just set a glass of white wine in front of me. "Your favorite Chardonnay. I picked it out especially for you. I know you like a light white." And I drank it without thinking it was caring. But was it caring? Now, thinking back, I realized that no one had particularly studied my preferences. Yes, I did tend to prefer white wine to red, but not so emphatically that I refused to try anything else. And Valerie was always so insistent about it, so sure of what was right for me. I got up and walked around the apartment, trying to remember more details. How did I feel after these dinners? Strangely enough, it was almost always drowsy and relaxed. I put it down to fatigue, to age, to hearty food and alcohol. After 70, many things start to take effect more strongly. It's normal, but now that normal was causing me to question it. How sleepy was I becoming? And how was it affecting my behavior? I sat down at my desk and picked up the notebook I kept for writing down important things. I decided to write down everything I remembered about the last few family dinners. Maybe that way I could figure out exactly what was bothering me. The dinner 3 weeks ago when they announced their financial difficulties. I remembered Valerie complaining about the cost of living, the expense of the kids, the mortgage payments. Christopher had chimed in, looking guilty and frustrated. And I remembered feeling a strong empathy, a desire to help, so I offered them monetary support, a rather large sum from my savings. It seemed like a natural solution at the time. The family needed help. I could help them. What was wrong with that? But now I was trying to remember how sober my judgment had been. Had I remembered exactly where I stood financially? Had I thought about the fact that I might need the money myself in the future? I vaguely recalled a feeling of being hazy, of not wanting to go into detail. Valerie had spoken so convincingly about her problems. Christopher had looked so unhappy. I just wanted to agree, to help, not to complicate the situation with questions and doubts. I wrote in my notebook, dinner on October 23rd, agreed to give money. I felt sleepy, unwilling to analyze, drank white wine. The next incident I remembered was the dinner a month earlier, when they offered me to help on a regular basis. Valerie was particularly eloquent then, talking about how hard it is for modern parents to handle kids and work at the same time. Christopher added about the importance of family ties, about how grandchildren need a grandmother. And I agreed. I agreed to practically be a free nanny 3 times a week, even though it was drastically changing my life. At the time, it also seemed like the right thing to do, driven by love for my family and a desire to help. But was it really my desire, or the result of skillful manipulation at a time when my ability to think critically was impaired? I wrote down, dinner on November 15th, agreed to regular help, drowsiness again, white wine. The more I remembered, the clearer the pattern became. Every time I was required to make an important decision about helping my family, I felt strangely malleable, ready to agree to any suggestion. And every time I drank the white wine that Valerie had so thoughtfully prepared for me. Coincidence? Maybe, but too constant a coincidence. I got up and walked to the kitchen and poured myself some more tea. My hands were shaking slightly, not from the cold, but from the growing realization that I might be the victim of something more serious than the usual family manipulation. What if there was something else in that white wine besides alcohol? What if Valerie or Christopher had added something to it that made me more compliant, less critical? The thought struck me as crazy. My own son couldn't have been spiking my medication. It was too unbelievable, too cruel. But the more I thought about it, the more plausible it seemed. Sleeping pills? Tranquilizers? Something that relaxes, reduces critical thinking, makes a person more susceptible to suggestion. Such drugs are available these days, and in small doses they can be imperceptible in wine. I went back to my notebook and started writing down all the details I could remember. When exactly was the wine served? Did Valerie always pour it herself? Was there an opportunity to add something to my glass discreetly? And yes, now I remembered, Valerie did indeed always pour the drinks herself. Allow me, Evelyn. You're a guest in our home. Rest, don't strain yourself. And I did, thinking it was a courtesy, or maybe it was something else. The memories were becoming clearer and clearer. The dinner 2 months ago when they asked me to sign documents related to some banking transaction. Just a formality for the convenience of family payments, so they can help us faster. I signed, not particularly getting into the details, trusting their explanations. What were these documents? Now I couldn't remember exactly. It didn't seem important to me at the time to understand the legal intricacies. The main thing was to help the family. But was it really help? And what exactly was I signing? I sat down at the phone and dialed the number of my bank. The answering machine said the office was open from 9 in the morning to 6 in the evening on weekdays. Tomorrow, Monday, I would definitely go there and find out what transactions had been made with my account in recent months. I spent the next few hours methodically remembering every family dinner, every meeting when something was required of me. The pattern became more and more apparent. Every time they needed my consent for something significant, financial assistance, regular babysitting, signing documents, a special atmosphere was created. Valerie cooked a particularly delicious dinner. Christopher was especially attentive. The children behaved especially sweetly. And the white wine was served. And after the wine, I became especially docile. Not just kind or sympathetic, but malleable, unable to criticize or refuse requests. By 3 a.m., I had made a detailed list of all suspicious episodes. There were more than a dozen cases over the past year and a half, and all of them had the same elements: an important request, white wine, my unnatural willingness to agree to everything. But the scariest part wasn't that list, it was realizing how many things I could have missed, how many decisions to make under the influence of the drugs, how much money to give away, how many commitments to make, and worst of all, if my theory was correct, Christopher knew about it. My son, the son I raised, the son I dedicated my life to, was knowingly part of this scheme, maybe even initiated it. The thought hurt so much that I felt physically sick: nausea, dizziness, a clenching pain in my chest. Had the baby I had rocked in my arms, the one I had taught to walk and talk, turned into a person capable of such betrayal? But the facts were stubborn, and the facts said that something very wrong was going on in my son's home. I spent the remaining hours before dawn in agonizing deliberation. The plan matured slowly but surely. I needed proof. I needed to find out exactly what was going on with my finances, what documents I was signing, what was being added to my wine, and most importantly, I needed to decide what to do next. If my suspicions were confirmed, if I was indeed a victim of systematic deceit and breach of trust, what should I do? Should I forgive for the sake of preserving my family, or take measures that would forever destroy my relationship with my son and grandchildren? Dawn found me sitting at the window with a cup of cool tea in my hands. Outside the window, the city was waking up. The lights in the apartments of the early birds were turning on. The first passers-by hurrying to work were streaming down the streets. The ordinary life of an ordinary Monday. But for me, this day was to be the start of an investigation that could change everything. I got up, showered, dressed, and waited until 9 o'clock for the bank to open. I had a lot of questions, and I was determined to find answers to them, no matter how painful they turned out to be. At 8:30, I was already standing in front of the bank, first in line. I was going to find out the whole truth about what had happened to my life in the last few months. The bank opened at 9 sharp, and I was the first one at the counselor's window. A young man in a smart suit politely asked what he could do for me, and I asked for a statement of all my transactions for the past 18 months. He typed something on the computer, frowned, and asked me to wait a moment. "Mrs. Turner," he said when he returned with a folder of documents, "you've had quite a few transactions. Are you sure you want a full statement?" I'm absolutely sure, I replied. When he handed me the printout, I felt a chill go down to my bones. The sheets were written in long columns of numbers transfers, cash withdrawals, payments. The amounts made my head spin. In the last 18 months, more than $120,000 had been withdrawn from my account. The money left regularly, in small amounts, that at first did not arouse suspicion, but in the aggregate amounted to a huge sum. Most of the transfers were for Christopher's family: daycare payments, medical bills, emergency expenses. But some of the transactions I didn't remember at all. Large transfers to accounts that told me nothing, payments for some services I didn't need. And worst of all, some of these transactions were made with my electronic signature on the days of those very family dinners. These transfers, I showed the consultant a few lines, were they authorized by me? The young man looked carefully at the documents. Yes, all transactions were carried out with your consent. Here is your electronic signature, time, and date. Some through online banking, some through an app on your phone. And can we find out from which device the transactions were made? Sure. He went back to the computer. Most of the transactions, interestingly enough, are not from your usual device. The IP address matches the neighborhood where you live, but it's a different computer or phone. The picture was becoming clearer and clearer. Someone with access to my banking data was making transactions on my behalf, and it was happening on days when I was under the influence of whatever they put in my wine. I want to block all transactions that require electronic confirmation, I said, and change all passwords. Okay, but first, we'll need to confirm your identity and go through the security restoration process. Any suspicion of fraud? I hesitated. To officially report fraud meant launching an investigation that would inevitably involve Christopher. Was I prepared for that? Not yet, I answered. I just wanted to secure my account. The procedure took over an hour. New passwords, additional layers of protection, requiring me to be there in person for large transactions. When I left the bank, I was heartbroken to realize the magnitude of the fraud. My next stop was the office of Robert Stings, the attorney who had helped me draft my will 5 years ago. He was an elderly gentleman with a gray beard who had handled our family's affairs since my husband's time. Evelyn, how are you? He greeted me warmly. Is something wrong? Robert, I need to completely rewrite my will, I said without preamble. He raised his eyebrows. Completely? What's wrong with the current one? In the current will, the main heirs were Christopher and the grandchildren. The apartment, the savings, the jewelry, everything was to go to the family. Natural and proper, I thought at the time. I want to sign everything over to charitable organizations. Robert put aside his pen and looked at me carefully. Evelyn, this is a very serious decision. Would you like to tell me what happened? I told him about my suspicions, about the oddities with the bank transactions, about the manipulations at family dinners. Robert listened attentively, asking clarifying questions from time to time. I understand your concerns, he said at last. But changing a will under emotional stress can be appealed by the heirs. They will say that you acted under the influence of temporary obfuscation. What's your advice? Let's first have a medical examination to confirm your capacity. Then I'll draw up a new will detailing the reasons for your decisions, and it's very desirable to have witnesses who will testify to your sanity. That was reasonable. We agreed to meet in a week when I would be examined and my intentions finalized. From the lawyer's office, I went to the doctor's office. The family doctor who had been seeing me for the past 10 years gave me a full examination and certified that I was of sound mind and memory, capable of making informed decisions. I spent the evening at home thinking about what had happened. The evidence was accumulating, but it remained circumstantial. I had no direct evidence that I had been spiked with something in my wine. Just strange coincidences and suspicious bank transactions. I needed a decisive experiment. I needed to put Christopher and Valerie in a situation where they would show their true intentions. Wednesday morning, Valerie called. Evelyn, we're having guests again for Saturday. Chris has invited some colleagues with their families. A barbecue in the garden, weather permitting. You'll come, won't you? Of course, I replied. Great. I was also thinking, it's been a long time since we've spent time together without children or strangers. Why don't you come over early and we can have a quiet family dinner? Just like old times. That's a good idea. Why don't you come by at 5 o'clock? I'll cook something special. I sat there with my pipe in my hand for a long time after the conversation. A quiet family dinner was exactly what I needed. One last check before making a final decision. I spent the next few days preparing. I traveled to another city to see a private investigator who specialized in family investigations. I ordered a wine sample analyzed if I could discreetly take a sample. I drafted a detailed letter describing the whole situation and deposited it in a safe deposit box along with copies of all the documents. On Friday morning, the will was ready. Robert Stings had drafted it perfectly, a legally sound document that explained in detail the reasons for my decision. The apartment would go to a local elderly service, the savings to an orphanage, the jewelry to an organization that helps victims of domestic violence. Are you sure about this decision? Robert asked one last time. Absolutely. Then sign it. And remember, if anything happens to you, a copy of the will be forwarded to the appropriate authorities immediately. Saturday came gray and rainy. The barbecue in the garden was canceled, but that was to my advantage. A quiet home-cooked dinner was exactly what was required for the final inspection. I dressed particularly carefully, choosing an elegant black dress and pearl earrings, a gift from my late husband. If this was indeed the last family dinner, I wanted to look dignified. In my purse, I put the small vial the detective gave me. If I can discreetly collect a sample of the wine, the analysis will tell me exactly what's in it. On the way to the bus stop, I thought about the evening ahead. If my suspicions were confirmed, if Christopher and Valerie really were who I thought they were, it would be the end. The end of a relationship, the end of a family, the end of illusions of love and caring. But if I'm wrong, if I find an explanation for all the weirdness, will I be able to forgive myself for my suspicions? Can I regain trust in my own son? The bus arrived right on time. I sat at the window and stared out at the familiar streets of Haisham, perhaps going to see my son for the last time as a loving mother and grandmother. In an hour, everything would be clear. In an hour, I would know the truth about my family, no matter how painful it turned out to be. The house greeted me with the flicker of candles in the windows and the smell of something exquisite wafting from the kitchen. Valerie had really tried to create the atmosphere of a special evening. When she opened the door, she looked flawless. An elegant dark green dress, neatly styled, makeup that emphasized her beauty. Her smile was especially warm, almost radiant. Evelyn, how wonderful that you came. She hugged me tighter than usual. You look marvelous. That dress suits you very well. Thank you, darling. Where are the kids? At my sister's sleepover. I thought we should have a grown-up evening, talk about important things without the kids interrupting. Christopher came out of the living room, also festively dressed in the same new suit they'd bought last week. He looked content and relaxed, which was unusual. His son always seemed tense lately. Hi, Mom. He kissed me on the cheek. You look great. Come on in, make yourself comfortable. We're spoiling you today. The fireplace was burning in the living room, creating a cozy atmosphere. On the coffee table were snacks, expensive cheeses, olives, nuts, miniature pies. Everything looked like an expensive restaurant. What are you drinking? Christopher asked, heading for the minibar. We have your favorite Chardonnay. We bought a new bottle especially. Here we go. I watched his movements carefully. No red, I asked. Red? He froze for a moment. Of course there is, but you don't like it? Last time I tried it, I loved it. I'd like to try it again. Christopher and Valerie exchanged a quick glance that they clearly didn't want me to notice. Mom, but we have such good white wine. Valerie intervened. It's French from the area you love. I picked it out specially. I'll try the red, I insisted. But white is better for appetizers, Valerie continued. We'll open the red for the main course, okay? Their insistence was becoming more and more obvious. I could see Christopher shifting nervously at the bar, and Valerie clasping her hands together. No, I want red now. Another pause, another exchange of glances. Okay, Christopher gave in. Red is red. He opened the bottle of red wine, but I noticed that he was the last to pour it for me, lingering at the bar with his back to me. What's he doing there? Adding something to my glass? When he handed me the wine, I accepted it but didn't drink it. To family, Christopher toasted. To family, we repeated. Valerie and Christopher sipped from their glasses, but I only brought the wine to my lips, mimicking a sip. The liquid had the usual red wine flavor, but there was something else in the aftertaste, a slight bitterness that shouldn't have been there. How are things going at work with Christopher? I asked, setting the glass on the table. Great. My son perked up. Brandon's very happy with my work. He's talking about a promotion next month. That's great. Yeah, we're on a really good streak right now, Valerie added. The kids are growing up healthy. Chris is doing well at work. Everything is working out just fine. She said it with a special warmth, glancing at my untouched glass. You don't drink wine, Christopher remarked. Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm just taking my time. But it'll get cold. Red wine should be drunk at the right temperature. Their concern was becoming more and more apparent. Why was it so important to them that I drink this particular wine? Mom, you seem strange today, Valerie said. Maybe something's wrong. On the contrary, I'm fine. I'm just thinking about the future. The future? Christopher stepped forward. What future? My future, about how to make good use of what I have. Another exchange of glances. I could see them tense up. What are you talking about, Mom? The will? I think it's time to revisit it. The will? Valerie almost choked. But why? You've already made a reasonable distribution. Maybe a little too reasonably. Sometimes it pays to do the unexpected. Christopher got up and came over to me. Mom, you're scaring me. Let's have a drink and talk calmly. He took my glass and held it out to me. I don't want to, I said clearly. But why? What happened? Nothing happened. I just don't want to drink any more wine that you put sleeping pills in. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Christopher froze with his glass in his hands. Valerie went pale. For several seconds, no one said a word. What did you say? Christopher whispered at last. What you heard perfectly well. I know what you put in my wine. I know you've been doing it for months. And I know why. Mom, what are you talking about? Valerie tried to smile. What sleeping pills? You've seen me open the bottles yourself. I did, but I didn't see what happened afterward. What was added to my glass while you distracted my attention? Christopher set the glass on the table with trembling hands. Mom, this is crazy. Who put that in your head? No one did. I figured it out on my own. Bank statements are very revealing. Bank statements? Valerie sat on the edge of the couch. What does the bank have to do with it? It has to do with the fact that over $120,000 disappeared from the account. Transactions I don't remember. Transfers I didn't authorize. On days when I was feeling particularly malleable, I watched them interject, trying to find an explanation. Mom, Christopher began, maybe you're confusing things. At your age, your memory sometimes. Don't you dare. I cut him off abruptly. Don't you talk about my age and my memory. There's nothing wrong with my memory, and I remember perfectly well how sleepy I used to get after every meal you had, how I agreed to all your requests without thinking of the consequences. Valerie stood up and walked over to me. Evelyn, you're obviously overexcited. Maybe you should see a doctor. Sometimes stress can cause paranoid thoughts. Paranoid? I'm up too. I've already been to the doctor, a full workup. There's nothing wrong with my psyche. Your conscience, however, is in big trouble. Mom, please. Christopher tried to intervene. Let's talk calmly. I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I pulled the bank printouts out of my bag. Here's your misunderstanding. Transfers to accounts I don't know about. Payments for services I don't use, all on the days of our family dinners. Christopher took the documents with trembling hands. He read silently, growing increasingly pale. But this, it's a family favor, he said at last. You agreed to it. You agreed under the influence of the drugs. You purposely clouded my mind to get access to my money. No, Valerie exclaimed. That's not true. We never. Valerie, stop talking, Christopher said quietly. She looked at him with surprise, and then fear flashed in her eyes. Chris? Christopher sank down in his chair, covering his face with his hands. God, how it had come to this. So it's true then? I felt my legs shake, though I was ready for that admission. Not quite what you think. Christopher looked up. We didn't mean to deceive you. It's just, we had so much debt, mortgages, loans, expenses for the kids. And you've always been so generous, but sometimes you doubted, analyzed. So you decided to take away my doubts? That wasn't my plan. Valerie pointed at Christopher. He suggested it. He said it was best for everyone. Valerie! Christopher looked at her with horror. Why? Now that it's all out in the open, I'm the one who has to answer for it. She turned to me. Evelyn, we really didn't mean to hurt you. Just a little sedative to make you calmer, more trusting. A little sedative? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You poisoned your own mother and your children's grandmother. I did not, Christopher objected. Small doses, harmless to the health. We're not monsters. Not monsters? I looked at him as if he were a stranger. Then who are? Who puts medicine in their mother's food? Who steals money from a 72-year-old woman? We didn't steal, Valerie exclaimed. We were just taking what you would have given us anyway, sooner or later. Sooner or later? I felt a surge of rage. So you've already disposed of my inheritance while I was still alive? They were silent, and in that silence was the truth. How many more years did you plan to continue this? I asked. Until I died? Or did you have plans to speed up the process? Mom, what are you saying? Christopher was horrified. We never wanted to hurt you. We didn't? Then what did you do? Taking care of me? I pulled a document out of my purse and placed it on the coffee table. This is my new will. Now you don't have to wait for me to die or put me on medication. My entire estate goes to charitable organizations. Valerie grabbed the document and quickly ran her eyes over the text. You can't do this, she shouted. What about the children? What about their future? The children? I looked at her with contempt. What kind of children will grow up with parents who poison their grandmother? They'd rather be disinherited than become like you. Evelyn, you don't understand. Valerie rushed to me. We can fix this. We'll never again. Never what? Never poison me again? That's so generous. Christopher stood up and walked over to me. There were tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm sorry. I know what I did was awful, but I'll pay it all back. Every penny of the money, every dime. and we'll find a way to make it up to you. Make it up to you? I backed away from him. Chris, you betrayed the person closest to you. You made me a victim in my own home. How can you make it up to me? But I'm your son, he exclaimed desperately. I love you. Do you? I felt tears coming to my eyes. I don't need that kind of love. I headed for the exit, but Valerie blocked my path. You can't just leave. What about your family? What about grandchildren? What family? I looked at her coldly. There is no family anymore. There are only people who used my love against me. But it's not the children's fault. It's not the children's fault. But they can't grow up in a house of criminals. I went out into the hallway and began to put on my coat. Christopher followed me. Mom, don't do this. Don't ruin our family. I'm not destroying it, I said without turning around. You've already destroyed it yourself. We can change it. We can start over. No, I shook my head. Some things can't be changed. The trust you betrayed, the love you abused, none of that can be repaired. Opening the door, I turned around one last time. Christopher stood in the doorway, Valerie crying in the living room. My son looked broken, but I no longer felt any sympathy for him. Goodbye, I said. I won't see you again. The door closed behind me with a final click. I stood on the porch, breathing the cold evening air, and felt strangely relieved. It was finally over. I was finally free of the illusion of a family that was really just a beautiful lie. The rain intensified, and I hurried to the bus stop. A new life was ahead of me. A lonely but honest life. A life without betrayal, without manipulation, without people who covered themselves with love to hurt. That was the price of truth, and I was willing to pay it.